Good afternoon. It's better. I'm an idiot. I don't know how many of you are keeping up to date on me on Instagram, but I'm not gonna guess many. If you'll recall me mentioning it before, I am an author. But my first book, my debut, called The Witch Watcher, looks like this, was finished. Hold on a second. That is not where me being an idiot comes in. No, I'm not an idiot because I wrote the book. I'm an idiot because I don't know how. And so yeah, it was done. But upon reflection, it shouldn't have been. I had a friend of mine proofread the manuscript way back in December, and her feedback is very valuable, and I am very grateful for her and the time that she took to tell me what was wrong with my book. She's very insightful, meaning she knows how to write books. She's very good with literature. And, well, the thing about my book, The Witch Watcher, which looks like that, is that I wrote the first draft when I was 12. Over quarantine. And, what makes me an idiot is that for the past 5 years, I've been staring at a finished manuscript that was written by a 12-year-old, editing it only slightly, and then declaring it done. And thanks to the insight of my wonderful friend who proofread my book, I was able to see that, you know, a manuscript that I wrote without really knowing how to write a manuscript was flawed. Following all of her suggestions, I decided the only way that I could properly consolidate and improve upon what she had commented on, told me to improve, was to start from scratch and write the whole thing over. And I've been doing that, it's July now, I've been doing that for 7 months. And it's been going well. I have a weekly word count goal of 1,000 words. So every week I'm supposed to go up by 1,000 words. That's how it works. And right now, I am 6 chapters in. And I know that doesn't sound a lot, but as far as word count goes, I'm at 18,158 words. It's more than I thought it was, actually. I thought it was only... Never mind, I guess I wrote something when I was looking. And I know that probably also doesn't sound like too much, but I probably don't have to tell you. If you've seen this video right here, which you should... I don't know, I think it's entertaining. I'm a little biased, but... So anyway, if you've seen that video, I probably don't have to tell you that writing is, well, it's, you know, it's one of my greatest passions, but it's also the part where my depression hits the most, and I've had a really rough year. It's why I haven't posted, it's why I've only posted 2 videos since my rebirth, channel reboot, whatever you want to call it, because I've got I had a lot going on towards the latter half of the year, and the only thing that I really wanted to focus on was my book and my personal life. However, because writing is so greatly impacted by my depression, and my personal life was pretty depressing, writing, while I would say it's been consistent, it's definitely not been the most productive. You know what I mean? Like, when I was in 2020, I had nothing else to do in quarantine besides write this book. That was all, nothing was happening, right? Actually, the week that I started writing this book was the week that I had started virtual learning. And I still was able to finish it in 3 months. Jesus Christ. I still don't know how I did that. Probably a large part of it was because I was... Why did hairs just keep spawning in my mouth, and I don't understand. The reason why I was able to write it so quickly was quarantine. Also because I was younger, and I had such starry-eyed ambition. And, that has faded. So within the last 7 months, I have written 18,000 words. That is what I would call an achievement. If you are curious about how it's going, my Instagram is at JupiterReigel, and I post there all the time, and it's pretty cool. Anyway, and every week that's where I put my updates, so. And especially now during the summer, I'm trying to write every single day and have like keep track of my word count per day, so that way I don't accidentally burn myself out doing nothing. Which sounds backwards, but I have ADHD, and so sometimes I avoid things. It is me actually burning myself out. But all that isn't what makes me an idiot. I've been moving along, trying my best, writing 18,000 words. That's not idiotic. No, what's idiotic is the fact that I had all that time and I didn't actually make an outline for my rewrite. I just sort of jumped in. So even after 5 years of technically being an author, I still don't know how to write a fucking book. So that's why we're here. That's why I'm here today. Hi. And so what I have started today, July the 6th, is writing an outline for the book that is 5 years old, that I've been rewriting for 7 months. 18,000 words in. That's a lot of words. I didn't have an outline, so I'm writing an outline. So what I'm doing is I have this app. It's called Oblivion. Not sponsored or anything. I'm just saying, it's great. I highly recommend it. It's free. It's definitely hard to understand at first, but once you get used to it, it's literally like every single thing. I don't know. In my opinion, it's everything I need, but that obviously changes depending on who you're talking to. So what I'm doing is I'm going through each chapter of my original book. There's only 20, hold on, I think it's 21? It might be 22. I think it's 22. It's 22. Go, hello? Okay, 22 chapters, and I'm going through each one of them and like writing down basically the barest of bones of what happens. Like as much as I think is relevant to improving. You know what I mean? And as I'm going, I'm making notes like this, flying away, right? And I'm writing down like, what's wrong with this part? What's wrong with that part? Blah, 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 blah. Per segment. And segments, they're basically just these fancy ways of breaking up the text. So going by segment, by chapter. Currently, I'm on chapter 2. Now, I've already rewritten chapters 1 and 2. In fact, I've rewritten up to chapter 6. However, I'm making the story a lot longer. Because originally, when I wrote The Witch Watcher, it was 122 pages. That's not a very long book. When I put it into the format that I wanted my book to be, as it stands, it is currently 260. Now that's a bit bigger, but all of these books are probably over 300 pages. And I don't like comparing myself to these wonderful authors over here that are definitely much more experienced than I am. But my story can go so much deeper and be so much longer and more complex, which is what I want it to be, right? I've also, because technically this book has been finished for so long, I am almost done writing the sequel. Like the first draft to the sequel book, I've almost done writing it. And that is 225 pages of standard paper format, right? So it's like 8 by 11, I think. And that's just the first draft, right? When I put that into printing format, it's gonna be a lot longer. And having this book be as short as it is makes the story very rushed. And it's not, I don't want it to be that way. Because when I was 12 and I just wanted to tell the story, and so it was, I didn't care how I was doing it, I was just doing it. And that's how you're supposed to write first drafts. You're not supposed to be worrying about everything. But now I'm older, and I have been doing this for a while, and I've been in this world for a while, and I've been thinking about what I want the theme of the book that I wrote so long ago to be, and that I didn't include in the first time I wrote it. What I originally did when I wrote the book for the first time was I was dividing each dividing each chapter into segments, and each segment was a different sort of scene. Like it was change in setting, change in time, change in perspective, that sort of thing. Now, my current draft, hopefully my final draft, I don't want to do this again. I have 2 segment dividers. That's those little stars that I showed you earlier. Out of 6 chapters, one of them is in chapter 2, the other one is in chapter 5. And the only thing they do is change perspective. My book's a multi-perspective book. So the only thing that the segments are marking is that the person who's speaking is different. So far, like I said, I'm at chapter 6. But right now, in the terms of the original draft, where I am in the story is only up to chapter 3. No, less than that, actually. Because I was moving so quickly when I first wrote this, I didn't let scenes be alone. It was always just constantly moving, and something sometimes things just happened and I just wanted to move on because I just wanted to tell the story, right? But now I'm giving each scene their own voice. I'm giving meaning to things that I didn't have, things I didn't let have meaning before. So for context, my book is about birds. All the characters are birds, and the main two characters, Sonia and Rari, are specifically barn owls, and they live in a barn owl village called Treesite. Like the heart of Treesite, it would basically, I guess, it would be its capital, like its town hall, I guess, is a place called The Nest. And The Nest is important for a lot of reasons, which I will probably explain later. I don't feel like doing it now. But as far as it relates to Sonia, main character, like the main character, like the actual protagonist, is it's where she needs to go to report on her missions. What missions, I hear you asking? Well, she is a witch watcher, which means, wait for it, she watches witches. We'll elaborate on that a little bit. Witches and owls, for as long as anyone can remember, have a very historical, kind of supernatural connection to each other. Basically mean allowing them to understand each other in a way that, you know, interspecies can't really do, in a lot of different ways. Which means a lot of different things, but the most important one is that throughout all of history, owls and witches have always been drawn to each other throughout, you know, centuries and things and changes and stuff like that. And this is important because in the modern day, in the book, which, to be clear, is the modern world, it is our world, it's not like a completely fantasy world and stuff, but it's not our modern times. It takes place before the 2020s. But it is reality as we know it. Just the birds talk to each other. And the witches can hear them, only if they're owls. That's basically, that's all, yeah. So the reason why the connection between the witches and the owls is so important in modern day is because, it's important because the owls see the developments in humanity's society, which, you know, yeah, and they want to sort of grow too, you know what I mean? Like, they don't want to be, like, industrial and technological and blah, 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 stuff like that. But they see humanity growing in ways that, like, have never before been seen. And they're like, hey, that gives me an idea. However, they don't understand what they're doing. And so, they gotta go to their buddies, the witches, who they can understand. So, however, they are watching in real time as humanity is growing, witches are becoming, you know, more and more ostracized in that society, and they're like, hey, we're gonna have a harder time trying to find them. So that's where witch watchers come from. Hey, there you go. They look for witches. Sonia, main character, is a witch watcher. But she's a rookie, right? And the story takes place on her very first watcher mission. And you know, things happen, MacGuffins happen. Following that, she needs to go report, and the Nest is where she goes to do that. So in the original manuscript, bringing it back around, she does that pretty early into chapter 2. Is not where I am anymore. So I've been adding things, I've been allowing things to move on their own, to exist on their own without things constantly moving forward and doing things. However, I'm definitely laying on the foundations of conflict more than I was in the original one. So really, in the original one, I was literally just going, right? There wasn't, yeah, there were, you know, MacGuffins and conflict, but they just sort of happened and then they moved on. Except until they didn't, and that's, you know, that's the plot. But this one, you know, with being in the world and being with the characters for so long, I can see themes that I never properly explored on in the original because that's not what I was trying to do. I was just trying to tell a cool story that I came up with in the middle of doing absolutely fucking nothing. Oh my god, I was so bored. So that's partially the reason why I don't have an outline, is because technically I'm only 2 chapters in. So where I've been filling in blanks and making it so long, I've been largely making it up, which I haven't needed an outline for necessarily, because the way my mind was working at the time was I took what could have been and I just sort of went with it. And yeah, I took the main part was just expanding on the story, but now as I'm on chapter 6 and things are basically meeting back up with the story, with the original story again, I actually have to do what I wanted to do in the first place, which is consolidate my proofreader's suggestions, which is where an outline is handy, because then as I go through each chapter, I'm like, hey, chapter 1, this is what I need to do. Chapter 2, this is what I need to do. Blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, what I'm doing today is I'm gonna be making an outline. So right now, I'm on chapter 2 of the outline. And second segment of chapter 2, which basically means I'm at the nest. We're at the nest. So on one side of my screen, I'm putting the outline that I'm working on in Oblivion, and on the other side of the screen, I have a Google document of my book that has all of my proofreaders' comments and important things. And you know, I have a script for a video that I wanted to make, just like literally specifically yapping about the Witch Watcher, but I found that really hard because I wasn't sure what technically counted as a spoiler and what didn't. I'm sorry if my hair is annoying you. It's annoying me too, I don't have any clips. But now I'm going in with no script, and I'm trying to, you know, be engaging without being a leak, you know? Okay, so the book starts off with, in the original, with Sonya. She's actually flying back from her first Watcher mission, and that proved to be an issue because it wasn't exactly specifying, you know what I mean? Because, actually, my book has a prologue, and what I'm doing in the prologue is I'm telling a completely different story. And I'm sure you're probably like, Jupiter, what? Bear with me. It's about a Watcher from years past. It literally says prologue, and then underneath of it, it says blank years ago. There's a sort of dusty splotch. I was pretty proud of that when I came up with it. And once the prologue ends, it's only like a page and like a half. Once the prologue ends, it immediately goes to this first chapter, which is Sonya's story. And that is sort of disarming because the transition isn't totally there. The prologue ends with the protagonist, which is just called the Watcher, flying away from the building that they had been watching. Immediately after, in chapter 1, Sonya's flying away from a building that she was just at, and so it gets wonky. They're not the same person. Bird, whatever, they're not the same. And that was sort of unclear. I did it for a reason. Looking back, it's supposed to be a bit of cyclical narration. Once everything comes back around, it'll make sense. It's supposed to have like a smooth transition, but when you're not fully understanding of what happened, instead of going like, oh, the Watcher's flying away and then Sonya's flying away, you're just like, are the Watcher and the Sonya the same person? They're not, which is why during the first chapter of my rewrite, what I did instead was I went through each and every single thing that like Sonya had seen while she was at her mission. Definitely an improvement, because I get to, you'd be surprised because the name of the book is called The Witch Watcher. There actually isn't a whole lot to do with witches specifically. And at the beginning, they were only a plot device, but they're not anymore. You know what I mean? Like, they prove to be a much, you know, core component of the world and the story and stuff, and they're important, right? But because when I was originally writing it, I had a story that started with the Witch Watcher, which is Sonya, and then the witches were sort of like pushed into the corner. To make them more individual, I described like what Sonya was seeing, what was she watching, what about the house would have ticked someone off, like, oh hey, that's maybe a witch person living there, we should check that out. And then Sonya went, like, oh hey, this is why. And that definitely rounds out the world more, because like I said, it is real world. They're in the real world, right? So I have to describe what witches means in the context of reality, but also when seen from the perspective of an owl who doesn't know completely what's going on. That's like a collision of worlds, and so there's a bit of nuance. There are a bit of things that the owls can't see, they don't understand, and so they, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Anyway, when I rewrote the first chapter, I elaborated much more. In the first manuscript, I did not do that. I opened up the chapter, and by extension the book, with an info dump, which is not a good thing to do. But it's weird because I'm far past that point. Basically, as soon as Sonya's done her info dump in the first manuscript, You know what? From here on out, I'm gonna call the first draft the manuscript, and the one that I'm currently working on the rewrite, just so we're all clear that's what those words mean. I'm not gonna try and provide clarification every time I use them. So in the manuscript, Sonya info dumps everything. Basically everything you need to know about the world, about the witches, about like Tree Site itself, about Sonya. But you know what's missing? A reason to give a shit. And it's so just not gonna hook anybody because it's just lore down your throat. And then immediately after that, a shadowy entity literally comes out of nowhere and just knocks her unconscious through magical means. No. In the rewrite, what I did was, chapter ends after giving the reader sufficient reasoning to care about Sonya specifically. We don't need to care, because we don't need, at the beginning, we don't need to care about the world. We just need to care about Sonya. That's all we need. And then after that, then the shadowy entity comes out, and instead of knocking her unconscious, just sort of chases her out throughout the woods and scares the shit out of her. And then that's chapter 2. That is literally all that happens in chapter 2. And it's effective. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22. Yeah, 6 pages. And that works. And that works. Giving that entire part its own chapter allows it to exist on its own without needing anything else. Because in a manuscript, it was in between 2 segment markers. It really wasn't the focus of anything, and it was just sort of there. And so again, there's no reason to care about it. But now you've been given reasoning to care about Sonya, and then boom, just sort of it hits you, and it means something, at least a little bit. It means something enough to feel the impact, okay? It works, I think, as an effective way to draw you in. Chapter 1 is an introduction to Sonya when she's in her element. Like, that literally is her element. The story is called The Witch Watcher, and so the first chapter is her being a witch watcher, it's her watching a witch. And then immediately after that, it's turned on its head and she's completely shoved out of her element, she's scared out of her mind, she becomes super paranoid for a little while, and then immediately when she gets back to Tree Site, because that's basically like the shadowy entity monster thing chases her throughout the woods, and then she winds up back in her village, in Tree Site. And then, so she's thrusted out of her element, and then she's put back in really violently, and so she's like, you know, and that works. And I think it works really well. I'm actually really proud of it because I don't need a reason. That felt really good to say. Anyway, then the ending of the first chapter for the manuscript just says, hold on, it's really simple. Sleep came easier than she expected, even though she'd spent most of the night unconscious because she'd been knocked unconscious. Her dreams consisted of being lost in the forest, outrunning something, but only by a hair. And like, that's not effective. Like, that's not effective. But the ending of the second chapter, which again is basically the same thing that happens, is there's not an ending line that's like dramatic or anything. Here's this. The wing beats grew louder. Maybe that was just her heart. They were too similar for her to distinguish. Or maybe they were the same. There, a steady slope down to the forest floor that she eagerly took, angling herself so she would cut through the wind resistance like water, letting gravity pull her downward until the unknown was far, far above her. She opened her wings just before she leaned to keep her from splattering into the dirt, but she still hit the ground hard enough to cry out. An aching pain spread across her muscles before she even had time to catch her breath. Someone called her name. She could barely hear them over the air rushing in and out of her ears. See, it's a lot going on. And then when she realizes that the person who had called her name was her mother, things calm down, right? This is the ending 2 paragraphs. She didn't know how she ended up back in her nest. Perhaps she was able to scrounge up the strength in her wings to fly a few feet off the ground, or perhaps her mother had held her in her talons while she gently put her where she belonged. Regardless, come the next night, surrounded by familiar stories under familiar stars and familiar clusters of sticks and such that she knew better than her own feathers, with her mother snoring slightly perched on the edge beside her, Sonya awoke. But immediately after, in chapter 3, sleep did nothing to keep those shadows out of her mind. In fact, it was almost like they had thrived and festered in the intangible darkness behind her eyelids. I'm cooking! Oh my god. I love chapter 3 so much because it is just a dream. It was so interesting to write because none of it was tangible, right? So I was like describing how it was supposed to feel intangible to the reader, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I did a pretty good job. Yay! But like, that's how I was allowing things to be on their own. That's a really good example. So anyway, outlining. That's what I want to do. She only goes to the nest in the second segment. So like the first segment, something completely random happens that okay? It's not important at all. Second segment though, she's at the nest. And then in my manuscript, I explained that like why the nest was important. And my proofreader was so nice. She said, this is a great example of communicating little bits of world building info to your readers and integrating it into the story so it's not too info dumpy. So yay me. But like that, she explains the significance of the nest, which is basically what I, in short, summarize to you. But there's more to it than that, and that's what I expand on in chapters. Hold on. You know what? I kind of break it up. In chapter 4, I give a little bit to the people who work in the nest, as in like the people who run Treesite. They're called the council, and it's just a little bit, just how they impact on Sonya, like why they matter to Sonya, right? They're almost an antagonist, kind of. They're not fun. They're definitely not good guys, but it's not exactly like villain territory, you know what I mean? And then 5, I give the nest so much voice, and it kicked my ass. I don't know why it was so hard for me to do it, but it was not fun. It put me in a writing slump for like a month or more than that. It was insane. So rewrite, that's chapter 5, but in manuscript, that's still chapter 2. What I have so far is second segment starts with Sonya waking up again. There's no transition. It makes everything that we just had happen feel like it was a dream, because remember, the first segment is bogus. Sonya immediately remembers the accident from the previous night, immediately goes to the nest. Again, too much telling, not enough showing. That was a big problem that I had. No showing, just telling. And it was, eventually my friend had to make an acronym for it. She was like SDT, and it was basically like the main thing she commented. But now I know what I have to be doing. Then I actually do give a little bit of a reason. Sonya tried not to show how nervous she was in her voice. This was the first time she'd come to her nest by herself, and she didn't know what was going to happen. And then like it's kind of explains, and then it kind of goes, okay, it goes into detail. Nest kind of freaks Sonya out. In the rewrite, I definitely go into more detail about how I give the counselors more meaning. I give like the nest and like the way it Sonya feels about it much more meaning. Conversation with random neighbors. Note, this is not important. And describes the inside of the nest. Like there's meaning to the reason why the nest is the way it is. It's a building, basically. I mean, we wouldn't call it a building, but it for owls, it is definitely a building. It's not like, you know, made of like mortar and stone or whatever. It's basically just a basket, like weaved with very little tiny little knots and stuff, like staked to the ground. And it's important because it's a pillar of owlish modernization. And that's all I'm going to give you, because some of it, I wouldn't call it spoilers, but it's definitely more fun to read it, in my opinion, in my honest, humble opinion. It also is, the nest is, it's a pillar of friendship, because there's not only owls in this story. Yeah, that's what Sonya and Rari are, and that's what for the most part, that's the main setting, is an owl village. There's also hawks. Hawks play a major role in history, and hawks and the owls have an alliance, and so that the nest is a testament to that, as well as what it means to the owls alone. Again, that's all I'm gonna give you. The reason why I'm writing an outline now as opposed to at a more inconvenient time is because we're in chapter 6 and we're going back into the nest, which is where the story meets itself again. And because we're back on the original plot, I need to make it matter more than it did in the original. And that is what I need an outline for, because there's a lot of problems. For example, I rely too much on dialogue. The counselors, they had this little quirk in the manuscript where they would just like say things. Like they weren't like like instead of like having this like these like asides of like discussion, especially since they're like the leader of the village, Her name's Avia. She's great. She's only one, and then the council, there are 14 counselors. And so the counselors have more weight to their voices, and that's a major part of Sonya's internal conflict. So in the manuscript, I gave them this quirk where they would just talk over each other and over Sonya, and so they would like just interjection. It wasn't really efficient, especially because their voice holds so much weight. I want to allow their voice to have that much weight, but I still need to understand what I need to improve on in the original. I can't just wing it anymore. Also, another thing, because the story had been moving so quickly, Sonya as a character was so... I didn't give the reader any time to, like, understand why they should care about Sonya. Like, yeah, I infodumped about all of her backstory immediately, but also, like, she didn't have a lot of character in the beginning. Like, I definitely flesh her out later, like right now, but definitely not as much as I could. So that's another thing. I'm trying not to make it too long because I don't want to spend a lot of time on like every single different thing, but because this is exactly where I need to be, I am looking a little bit harder. So the counselors are introduced. Like I said, there are 14 of them, and they, as a collective voice, are very, very weighty, right? Especially to Sonya. They are the reason why she doubts herself so much, and she doesn't really trust herself to make these judgment calls and stuff as as the watcher that she wants to be. Because she's very passionate about being a watcher. She really, really like I said, it was her first mission at the start of the book, and so she really wants to show the counselors, the people who are in charge, what she has to offer. However, the counselors are hoity-toity with their noses in the air, and so they don't see her, they just see someone they can put expectations on, and so she has gifted kid syndrome. That's basically where it's going. And in the manuscript, I didn't give them hardly any weight. The voices aren't weighty, and they give nothing more than throwaway lines. There isn't a reason why Sonya feels nervous about them, or how they feel her self-doubt, or even that she has any self-doubt for that matter, because like I said, her character's been very flat thus far. And then the ending of chapter 2 manuscript, my friend said was very well done. I'm not going to explain it, because that actually is kind of a spoiler, is Avia, the leader of the village, like I said, who I said was great, because she is, because of her position, her voice technically is the most important to listen to. It's just that figuratively, the counselors, because there's so many of them, and they all just are so loud and in a figure of speech, sometimes she's not what is heard, you know? So chapter 2 ends basically with Avia showing that she has more weight. My friend said that it was a great end, she said. But another thing that I've noticed as I've been writing the second book too, is that Avia, as much as I love her as a character, and I think she's really cool, she doesn't have that much of an arc, and it's kind of a bummer, because, okay, so Avia is the leader, but she has a second in command named Irene, and Irene plays a very important role in the active parts of the story. She becomes important, but she doesn't really have an arc, and so she doesn't really have a perspective, and that part was kind of important. I mean, no, that part was kind of purposeful when I wrote the manuscript in the first place, and like I realized that kind of extends to Avia too, but I'm looking at it now, and because I'm basically at the end of writing the second book, I can see how I can give Avia an arc. I'm just worried because I don't want to take away the power that she has by like giving her sort of, not obvious weaknesses, but like, I don't know, it's weird because I've never really written about like powerful people before. Like Sonya, Rory, they're underdogs. That's just, I don't know. I like relating to those stories, but I really like Avia. She's really cool. And she's not, I will say this, she isn't mean. She's definitely a good guy. There are ways that she can start off flawed. And I know that that's like such a hard thing to find in like media nowadays, especially since she's a woman, right? She's a woman in power. The allowing her to make mistakes kind of feels wrong, and like I'm not immune to that, because I want her to I want the reader to understand that she has power, and I want the reader to understand that she's not the problem. There's 100% like a message that I'm going for in this story. I made the choice to have her not be a part of it. Like, I definitely could, but I felt like it would be too cliche, and I just didn't want to, because I feel like Avia, as just the person that she is, the character that she is, she definitely is driven by, she wants to help. She's not the leader of the village because she wants like power or whatever. Where the counselors like definitely are the voice of like a bigger issue. Basically, the issue in short is like respecting students, I guess. That's really simple way of putting it, but that's basically like the root, I guess. And the counselors, they each serve a different role, and it's about this main thing, this main issue. Some of the counselors end up being good guys, some of the counselors end up staying the way they are, but Avia, as a character, is not, like, she sees and respects Sonia. There's definitely ways that I can make her kind of complicit, where she says but she doesn't do, you know what I mean? Use that against her, and then have her come back around, like her realizing the power that she has and stuff. I hope that didn't give anything away. So I can see ways I can make her complicit. I don't like her too flawed compared to the counselors. Like, the counselors, they definitely, I think it's pretty easy to hate the counselors. I don't really want people to hate Avia. Okay, that's chapter 2. I finished it. So the ending of chapter 2, it definitely establishes that Avia's voice has more weight and more power, but it definitely doesn't give as much weight as she could. Like, in the rewrite, she hasn't been properly introduced. She's been talked about, but we haven't been shown it completely, right? The first time that we're actually like shown like the way her voice matters is, I'm gonna pull it up. Leader Avia's voice made its murmured way into the clearing, quiet enough to be unintelligible, but still it commanded everything into silence. The scuttling footfalls of the owlets and their parents stilled. Sonia could practically hear the shock-dumb smiles fall from her old classmates' faces. The air around them all bubbled and tense, boiling with anticipation. It felt like even the trees leaned forward, ever the eternal audience. Like that, like everything comes to a full stop because Avia's speaking. And they can't hear what she's saying, and that's the point. The object wasn't to listen, not to eavesdrop, just to see. But, like, that's like the next 2 lines. The idea of her speaking, of her giving an indiscernible declaration was enough to put everything around the nest in silence. That's the power that I want to go for. You can't, like I said, you can't hear what she's saying, so you don't know if it's good or bad. But because of the context of the rest of that chapter, which is chapter 5, I can make it go either way. I go one way where she's saying something kind of positive. That means she doesn't really get she doesn't really get much of an arc. But if I go the opposite direction and have her say something kind of like backhanded, where it's like she meant well, you know what I'm saying? It could basically set up the rest of her arc and have it mean something else. So, chapter 3. I have got to go to the bathroom. Hey gang, it's me. The person you're watching right now. You have a lot of stamina. That was a really long video. I really appreciate you guys being patient and not like rushing me or like saying, oh, you dropped 2 videos and left. That I promise I didn't forget. I just have had a lot going on. I just wanted to, pop on, say thank you, say hello again, hi, and then also just share with you that, as you can see, I got much farther than chapter 3 in the outline. It's a win!